Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are wrestling with a source that details not just a pandemic, but a catastrophic failure of society, one rooted right here in Belfast. We're talking about a flu virus that didn't just kill people, it fundamentally changed what death meant. And it engineered a collapse so fast it barely left time for panic.
It's an intensely detailed, almost a ground-level account. Our material provides a terrifying blueprint for how quickly, civil society just disintegrates when institutions fail to adapt.
Right.
We are watching the shift from standard policing and public health advisories to martial law and ultimately to sheer brutality.
Our mission today is heavy, but it's vital. We need to dissect three things: the precise mechanism of societal collapse, how quickly order turned to chaos, the shocking biological reality of this new enemy, which is so much more than just a typical infection, and maybe most importantly, the terrible moral calculus individuals were forced to perform just to see the next sunrise.
And to really understand that moral slide, you have to appreciate the scope of the initial shock. The narrative, it begins when society is already past bending.
What?
It has completely snapped.
Yeah.
We see this through the eyes of people like George, who's one of our primary perspectives, a police officer. Within weeks, the signs were undeniable. Workplace absences skyrocketing, small businesses just shutting their doors.
And the housing market crashing. The source mentions that. People frantically trying to sell and just get out.
Exactly. This frantic attempt to flee.
That desire to flee became moot, though, didn't it? I mean, people were desperately trying to book flights to Europe or America, and then suddenly all the airports just closed.
Completely blocked. They were trapped on the island.
Wow.
Precisely. And in that confined, desperate atmosphere, the whole tone of authority just shifted. I mean, overnight.
It went from what? Public service announcements?
Yeah.
Wash your hands?
Yeah, exactly. Wash your hands, stay home, the usual helplines. And then suddenly, there are these stark posters declaring martial law, promising detention for anyone found outdoors after curfew.
And that's the moment standard policing just evaporates, isn't it?
It's gone. This is where we see that concept of administering detention emerge.
Yeah, that phrase is chilling. For George and his partner Norman, they started as cops, but suddenly they became agents of something much, much more brutal.
They're administering detention, which we find out very quickly is just a sanitized, bureaucratic euphemism for taking extreme, often lethal, measures against the newly infected.
So this isn't just a story about a virus.
Not at all. It's a study in how fear allows institutional violence to just flourish. That phrase, administering detention, it needs dissection. Under martial law, detention was, nominally about isolation and preventing spread.
In theory.
In theory. But in practice, as resources vanished, it just became state-sanctioned abandonment, sealing the fate of the infected while pretending to maintain some kind of order.
Okay, so let's unpack phase one, the collapse and the new enemy. The harshness of this new system is perfectly encapsulated in the story of Flat 23.
Right. George's experience with the quarantine protocol, it shows that brutal, instantaneous shift. His memory immediately takes him back to the moment his role changed from, law enforcer to, to an executioner.
Yeah.
He realizes he wasn't just administering detention that day.
He was administering something much worse.
Much worse.
The scene at Flat 23 it's just chilling. George and Norman arrive, and they're wading through this thin, frantic crowd of people, mostly neighbors and relatives, huddled together.
And the paramedics are there, but they're exhausted. They're totally devoid of pleasantries. They just confirm the diagnosis with a simple, grim nod.
It was flu. That's all they say.
That's it. No more need for testing. The visible symptoms were enough. The chaos is immediate.
And Norman pulls his handgun.
Without hesitation. Not to shoot, but just assertively, to convince the people huddling around the doorway to just step back.
While George is battling his own internal noise, he's got this swearing woman screaming at him, threatening to record him on her fucking phone.
Right. That sense of professional detachment is just fighting a losing battle against raw, human terror.
And George is mentally fighting the jargon, isn't he? He's trying to process the horror through the language of bureaucracy, risk management, protocol, viable.
All terms, he notes bitterly, that were just dreamed up by bureaucrats in think tanks. He sees that these words have absolutely no relevance to the terror and the suffering inside that flat.
Where a young woman and her 6-year-old child are just deteriorating.
And then comes the culmination of it all, the act that just haunts George forever. They leave the tearful young woman and her child inside, and George silently gives the nod to the yellow-suited workmen.
These guys arrive with welding equipment.
They just move in efficiently, without a single word. They
Yeah.
begin sealing the windows, and then the steel door of flat 23. This is the definition of detention under this new martial law.
They're literally entombing them.
Condemning them to their deathbeds just to ensure they can't contaminate the outside world.
The reaction from the crowd outside is...
Wow.
It's instantaneous, isn't it?
Overwhelming. The second those welders strike their arcs, the crowd erupts. George notes it wasn't an average riot. It had a rawness to it, a desperation he'd never seen before.
And he says they were calling for help, not attacking the police, a detail that becomes critical later.
So critical for Norman. The violence just spills everywhere. Norman's gun accidentally goes off, wounds a young lad who's immediately trampled.
A paramedic loses his breathing apparatus in the crush and just collapses.
And in this horrifying accident, a welder swings his flame by mistake and it hits a middle-aged man's face. The description is just terrible.
The skin blisters and melts.
And the scream is deafening, even over the sound of George's own ragged breathing.
They barely escape, slamming the door shut in another flat, and they finally get a moment of silence. But in that silence, George encounters the event that changes everything. It flips the script from a standard viral collapse into a biological horror. The core realization: the bodies didn't stay down.
This is the definitive turning point. As Geri, another survivor we follow, reflects much later, just 2 months ago, when someone died, they stayed dead. Simple as that.
But not anymore.
Now, the flu hasn't just infected them. It has mutated and evolved. It's hijacking basic bodily functions in that little interregnum between death and reanimation.
We see this played out with chilling clarity. George and Norman burst into the flat of an older, hysterical woman. She's adamant her husband, Frank, is dead.
She keeps wailing, "I was a nurse. My Frank was dead." He'd been lying on the sofa, blood-stained and still, for about an hour.
And yet he rises.
Frank rises. The blankets fall at his feet. He shuffles uneasily, and he's making this deep, rasping sound. But George watches his chest.
It's still.
It remains still. He isn't breathing. He is metabolically dead, but he's neurologically active, driven by some kind of viral imperative.
The concept of death itself is just obsolete.
Butter.
So let's dedicate some serious time to Section B and defining this new enemy, because the survival of everyone hinges on understanding these specific biological changes.
Absolutely. The infection, it starts recognizably enough. Sneezing, coughing, fever, vomiting, diarrhea, the usual suspects.
But the final phase is distinct and, frankly, gruesome.
It is. Before the victim dies, copious amounts of mucus begin to congeal with phlegm and excrement. It's essentially draining and strangling their bodies from the inside out.
And once they reanimate, they have this very specific sickly appearance.
Right. The source describes coagulated blood, dark, hardened bile. The skin quickly becomes shiny or sun-bleached, and the eyes are just dead and cold.
And they move with those heavy, shuffling footsteps and emit that consistent, low, guttural, moaning growl.
Survival tactics are immediately dependent on understanding their sensory limitations, and this is where Pat comes in. He's a pragmatic, isolated survivor with some paramilitary training, and he becomes our expert analyst on the ground.
He develops some fascinating theories.
He does. He believes the constant raspy sound they make isn't a breathing sound at all. He thinks it's them trying to clear their throats because the flu has blocked up all their sinuses.
Why is that significant?
Because Pat extrapolates from that. If their sinuses and inner ear canals are blocked by this hardening mucus, the same biological process that kills them, then their ability to hear must be severely compromised.
Okay, so they can't hear well.
He also theorizes their eyesight is probably compromised too, which explains why they rely so heavily on following noise and motion, like, as he says, flies to light.
A detail that's crucial for any survivor planning to move.
Absolutely. But Pat doesn't just theorize. He conducts these violent, real-world tests to find their critical weakness.
We have that horrifying account of him shooting one of them twice in the chest with an AR-18 rifle.
And we should pause on that weapon. The AR-18 is significant. It was often associated with paramilitary groups in Ireland, known for being easy to strip down and transport.
So its presence confirms not only that these illegal arms were available, but that Pat has the technical expertise to use a military-grade assault rifle.
Exactly. And he uses this powerful rifle to shoot the creature twice. The first shot blows a sizable hole through its chest, scattering organs and bone, but it only crumples for a moment, it seems, unharmed.
Unharmed by the destruction of its vital organs.
Right, so Pat shoots again, completely shattering the upper torso and the diseased lungs, and yet the creature still clambers back onto its feet.
The utter failure of conventional ballistics. I mean, the heart, the lungs, the standard targets, they're meaningless.
It confirms that whatever is driving the undead is neurologically localized. It has to be.
So Pat makes the definitive, terrifying conclusion.
It's the head. You have to shoot them in the head. He establishes the new universal rule of engagement.
The virus hasn't just killed them. It has turned the brain into the central controlling hub of the reanimated body, completely bypassing the need for circulatory respiratory functions.
And to back up Pat's street-level discovery, we also get a scientific military perspective later on. It's from the chief researcher, Gallagher, at the Mahone Road Army Camp.
What does he observe?
Gallagher observes another key feature. This thick, clear mucus that emits from the pores after death, layering the skin. He theorizes this coating hardens like liquid latex.
To act as a natural preservative.
Exactly, against environmental decay, specifically the sun's damaging rays and just the passage of time.
That's a fascinating biological detail.
Yeah.
Why would a preservative coating be so important for the virus?
Well, it speaks directly to the virus's evolutionary success, doesn't it? Most corpses decay rapidly. But if the virus can ensure the structural integrity of the host body through this liquid latex skin...
Which is why they appear shiny or sun-bleached.
Right. Then the viral vectors remain viable and the threat lasts, well, indefinitely. It's a self-sustaining, long-term biological weapon. And that shiny skin actually serves as a protective shell, helping survivors differentiate the dead from the living from a distance.
The combination of Pat's tactical observations and Gallagher's structural analysis, it really elevates this threat beyond simple B-movie horror. This is a scientifically brutal opponent.
Absolutely. So moving into phase 2, we shift focus from the nature of the threat to the nature of survival. We look at individuals who manage to weather that initial storm, often by adopting extreme, sometimes morally contradictory strategies.
And we begin with Geri and her initiation on Dublin Road, a civilian whose survival relies entirely on quick wits and deception during her encounter with Balaclava Man or McFall.
Geri is immediately vulnerable. She sneezes, but it's not the flu, it's hay fever. But McFall, holding a gun, is instantly suspicious of any respiratory symptom.
She narrowly avoids execution by just maintaining her composure.
She convinces him it's allergies and, crucially, produces a packet of anti-allergy tablets from her back pocket as proof.
This incident establishes Geri's core survival trait, manipulation through performance. She doesn't just avoid death, she plays the role of the terrified, hysterical victim perfectly.
Yes, she uses tears and histrionics to manipulate both McFall and his associate, Lark, after they capture her and lock her in the patio.
And while she's locked away, quarantined for 3 days based on McFall's intense fear and his reading of news reports about the incubation period, she holds her hidden asset.
The single bullet. She had it concealed in her jeans pocket. McFall, in his panic and arrogance, had left the revolver on the kitchen table, believing it was unloaded.
She turns the tables in a single dramatic moment. When she's finally released from quarantine, she loads that concealed bullet, grabs the revolver, and secures control of the house and its supplies.
A complete transition. From helpless captive to cold-blooded controller, demonstrating that resourcefulness often trumps physical strength in this new world.
Geri's quick adaptability is a stark contrast to Pat's approach, which is pragmatic and very isolated. He lives with the younger, naive Karen in a high-rise flat, treating their apartment as a self-sufficient sanctuary.
And his sanctuary is well-equipped. Pat procures a significant cache of decommissioned paramilitary arms rifles and handguns, including the AR-18 we mentioned and an HK-UPS.
The HK-UPS is a highly reliable, compact, tactical handgun. This suggests Pat isn't just grabbing any old weapon. He's choosing high-quality, dependable firearms that require expertise.
It confirms his history and his systematic preparation. Pat takes on the role of protector and mentor to Karen. He patiently teaches her how to shoot, acknowledging with deep regret that this process is fundamentally changing her,
turning her into something she would never have been in the old world.
There's a deeply protective, almost paternal instinct there, but also a pragmatic acceptance that violence is now a prerequisite for life.
And this transformation is immediately tested, isn't it? While they're looting supplies in Flat 52, Pat is ambushed by a lumbering dead man.
Karen acts instantly. She applies her new training and shoots the creature twice in the head, saving Pat's life.
This moment is a defining moral turning point for Pat.
It is. He realizes that, despite the violence she committed, Karen remains the person she had always been. The act of killing in self-defense within this apocalyptic context doesn't corrupt her innocence.
It just ensures her survival.
It's an ethical justification for necessary violence.
We also need to examine McFall again, whose fear drives him to the darker end of survival.
His paranoia is acute.
He believes his balaclava, which he'd infused with the minty scent of his wife's nonsense perfume, somehow protects him from infection.
His fear dictates his treatment of Geri, but ultimately his own demise. Despite all his intense precautions, he succumbs to the flu.
Geri finds him in the patio, already symptomatic, sneezing, coughing, spitting bloody tissue. He's preparing for his death, intending to use the fully loaded revolver, the very gun Geri later takes, to ensure he goes out with a bang and doesn't become one of them.
And his final moments are tragically focused not on the dead outside, but on the living he failed. In a state of high delirium, he confronts a dead woman outside who resembles his wife, railing at her about his failure to provide, his long work hours, their damaged relationship.
It's a profound psychological insight. McFall's greatest fear wasn't the virus. It was the failure of his previous life. He dies consumed by the guilt of his marriage.
It proves that even in the face of biological annihilation, psychological burdens and regrets remain the sharpest pain.
That deep exploration of moral failure and regret sets the stage perfectly for Phase 3, where we investigate the catastrophic moral vacuum left by the very authority figures who are supposed to protect the population.
And the shining example of institutional failure comes through Patty's harrowing account of the Craigavon rescue camp.
Initially, it promised salvation, right? Food, water, warm bedding, safety.
All guarded by armed, yellow-suited personnel, including guards and doctors. It sounded like a haven.
But that promise was short-lived. The camp quickly degenerated.
Overcrowding was extreme. Patty describes people being rammed in like sardines. The sewage system failed entirely and supplies quickly dwindled, pushing people to act more like animals, fighting over meager scraps of bread and water.
And the decline moved quickly from passive neglect to active institutional cruelty.
The guards, overwhelmed and demoralized, just stopped caring about their official duties. This soon escalated into outright atrocities, shooting the sick in cold blood and callously dumping their bodies over the perimeter fence.
Just to get rid of them.
Right. And then the cruelty became purely predatory. Patty witnesses drunken guards assaulting young girls, which is what prompts him and a few others to make a frantic escape.
They use a truck to slam through the perimeter doors. It's a terrifying portrayal of a supposed sanctuary becoming a prison run by degenerates.
But here's the crucial twist that fundamentally changes how we view Patty's story. Lark later discovers a fake police ID card in Patty's belongings. It belongs to someone named Gallagher.
Gallagher, the military researcher.
The very same. This strongly suggests Patty was not just a survivor. He was either an operative or a spy, gathering intelligence on the other survivors.
So this is where we start connecting the dots. If Patty was linked to the military, and he was found near George's area, it suggests that intelligence gathering and tracking certain individuals were prioritized over general rescue.
Which loops back directly to George and Norman. The moral decay of authority is confirmed during Norman's final moments. During a supply run, he gets bitten on the arm by an infected man.
Facing imminent death, his psychological defenses fail.
He has a desperate confession to George. He admits they fucked up at Flat 23.
The profound realization. The crowds weren't attacking them.
They were running to them for help, running from the dead they had just witnessed rising inside the building. Norman regrets the brutal quarantine protocol, realizing they sealed those people in not as a necessary evil, but out of fear and institutional error.
And he asks George to fulfill a promise.
A final, gut-wrenching act of mercy and atonement. He asks George to go back to Flat 23 and put a bullet in the little girl's head to ensure she doesn't suffer the horrific fate of reanimation.
This promise adds enormous psychological weight to George, who is already haunted by that child, Brina Fico. Her face preys on his mind, causing him panic attacks, fueling his desperate need for meaning.
The physical act of atonement comes when he finally kills the newly turned Norman with 2 clinical headshots in a warehouse. The immediate fallout for George is immense.
He experiences a heavy clot of grief and contemplates suicide with the warm vodka in his gun.
He only stops himself because of the weight of that promise he still felt compelled to keep.
So now we introduce the formal military response in Section E, which gives us the full scope of this conspiracy and links it all back to Patty's ID. Jackson, a weary officer, ends up at the Mahan Road Army Camp.
And he's witnessing a military institution that is also collapsing, marked by drunken despair and just meaningless violence against the dead. The chief researcher here is Gallagher, the name on Patty's ID.
Gallagher is obsessed.
Completely. He's not treating patients, he's dissecting them. The source describes him dissecting the bound body of a kernel while the kernel is in the process of turning.
So he can study the liquid latex skin he theorized about earlier.
This is science driven by monstrous, desperate curiosity. Jackson, increasingly horrified, uncovers Gallagher's true agenda. The military isn't just surviving, they are actively tracking specific survivors in quarantined areas.
And Gallagher finally reveals the target.
He admits his targets are former subjects of a Home Office pilot project, a tracking program established post-peace process to monitor irksome illegal immigrants.
That's a chilling phrase. It reveals the pre-existing institutional prejudice.
The specific targets are Brigida Fico and her daughter, Brina.
This is the massive social and political insight. The state infrastructure before the pandemic was already set up to monitor, track, and ultimately marginalize specific groups.
The pandemic didn't create the surveillance system. It just gave Gallagher a new, horrific purpose for it. The little girl George, sealed inside Flat 23, was a known entity to the government long before the virus struck.
And here is the twist.
Brina Fico is alive and well. She survived inside Flat 23. Gallagher views her as vital to my continuing work for the survival of the human race.
He implies she holds the key to immunity or a cure.
Which perfectly explains why Patty, Gallagher's operative, was near George's location. George was the last known authority figure to have been in physical contact with the key subject, Brina Fico.
So the military establishment, through a morally bankrupt scientist, is hunting a child they once considered an irksome illegal immigrant, viewing her now as the last hope for humanity, or maybe more accurately as a clinical subject for dissection.
The emotional stakes couldn't be higher. We transition now to Phase 4, the path forward and the search for a cure, which culminates at the Finicky Tower block.
Geri, Lark, and George decide to seek refuge there. George knows it's locked, tight, and stocked, a true fortress. But they need to get past the massive horde of dead gathered outside.
Lark provides the crucial distraction. He suggests a petrol bomb, relying on his observation that the undead are drawn to commotion and bright lights.
Like flies to light, a sensory quirk Pat had theorized about.
Right, the fire draws the horde away from the main entrance. As George, Geri, and Lark approach the burning entrance, the front door of the block unexpectedly opens.
A young woman, Karen, and a little girl emerge, and George immediately recognizes his haunting ghost, Brina Fico, from Flat 23.
But in the ensuing chaos, George's redemption is tragically cut short. While fighting his way through the burning dead, one of them lunges at him point blank
And bites his finger.
sealing his fate. George, knowing the incubation is immediate, makes his final sacrifice. He chooses to stay behind, holding the stairwell against the incoming burning dead.
He makes peace with Lark, shakes his hand, and gives him a simple, deeply sincere instruction. Just look after her.
He means Geri, and now he implicitly means Brina too. He's fulfilling a different, better promise than the one he made to Norman.
Inside the block, we discover the chaos that had been happening. Karen was protecting Brina. Pat had found the child and realized she was alive. Really alive.
The past paranoia was consuming him. When the police Land Rover showed up, and later an RAF Wessex helicopter, Pat just assumed the authorities were hunting them for execution.
Let's contextualize the helicopter. The RAF Wessex is a military transport or search and rescue vehicle, so the authorities were either coming to evacuate or, more likely given Gallagher's actions, to secure the asset.
To secure Brina, Pat, driven by his survivalist paranoia, attacked Karen for trying to open the door and then fired his AR-18 at the helicopter, driving it away.
The outcome for Pat, our pragmatic survivalist, is tragic.
Karen later finds their shared flat, and Pat, true to his word that he would never turn, is hanging from his neck like some crude horror version of that swing ball game.
You made sure he went out on his own terms.
Exactly. So the remaining survivors, Lark, Geri, Karen, and Brina, flee to the rooftop, sealing the hatch below them. In this moment of intense finality, Brina, the focus of both George's torment and Gallagher's obsession, speaks her only known English word.
Murgus.
Murtis, which is Lithuanian or Latvian for death. A stark, powerful moment. But then Lark makes one last discovery.
A massive sign painted across the rooftop, clearly visible from the air. It reads, "We have the cure."
And Geri instantly connects the message to the child, declaring, "It means the child."
That brings us to our synthesis. This deep dive has offered crucial, terrifying survival lessons, demonstrating the complexity of living in a world defined by the Belfast flu.
First, the speed of societal collapse necessitated extreme, localized measures like quarantine and martial law. But this authority was inherently flawed, driven by paranoia, and it led directly to the moral catastrophe at Flat 23.
Second, the massive failure of centralized institutions. The rescue camps didn't offer salvation. They became death traps run by moral degenerates. And worse, they doubled as intelligence-gathering locations.
Right, confirming that systemic surveillance and institutional tracking were still priorities, even during the apocalypse.
Third, the specific biological reality of the threat. Body shots are useless. Headshots are the only way. We learned about Pat's sensible theory regarding their compromised hearing and Gallagher's observation of the liquid latex preservative coating.
And the critical point, the undead are highly sensitive to noise and fire.
And finally, the crushing psychological burden of survival. We saw it in George's guilt, Norman's final confession, and McFall's final moments consumed by marital failure rather than the immediate threat.
The key insight we developed is that the biggest, most immediate threats were rarely the slow, clumsy undead. They were the living driven by fear, like McFall, paranoia like Pat, or institutional violence, like the Craig Avon guards and the coldly scientific Gallagher.
These living threats manufactured far more violence against other survivors than the flu ever did directly. And that leads to the final provocative thought that ties this entire harrowing journey together. We began with George sealing a child, Brina Fico, inside Flat 23 as an act of calculated dehumanizing evil, an act facilitated by martial law and pre-existing institutional prejudice. We end with Lark, Geri, and Karen protecting the very same child on a rooftop, believing she holds the cure for humanity.
The largest remaining question is this. Will the authorities, who clearly track and target this child for clinical study, as Gallagher demonstrated, allow Brina to live long enough to save humanity? Or is her importance purely as a scientific asset to be exploited, fulfilling the systemic violence that began with the Home Office pilot project long before the flu even arrived?
The hope for a cure rests in the hands of the very people the state previously sought to monitor and control. That is a chilling paradox we are left to ponder in the shadow of the Belfast flu. Thank you for joining the Deep Dive.